Thank you, Beatrice, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have this opportunity once again to contemplate some aspect of Buddhism. It seems that Buddhism and vegetarianism is not as popular as karma and rebirth, but I didn't pick this title myself. Someone else picked the title for me this evening. And I think it was because I did mention at one time that I had given a talk on Buddhism and vegetarianism, and that there had been some very strong reactions from some of the members of the audience. And I guess whoever put the title to this talk was anticipating some strong reactions to enliven things up. But in actual fact, the only people who have strong reactions to talks are usually people who have very strong feelings about that topic. And usually that means very strong views about the topic. And this is a great danger. As soon as we develop very, very strong, fixed views about anything, it tends to make us rather rigid, and we develop a very closed mind, and thus we tend to overreact to anything that is said. If it's not in agreement with us, it must be against us, and that's all we see, black and white. And that is a great shame. So in actual fact, the Buddha did warn against this. He warned against attachments to views and opinions as one of the fundamental forms of attachments which causes suffering. And we see this over and over again in every aspect of life. The greatest number of conflicts that you are involved in your life will probably arise out of disagreement with regard to certain views about things. In other words, the conflict is due to our attachment to our view, our perception. Of course, we need to have views. We cannot live without views. A view is the way we see something, the way we understand something, our preference with regard to the variety of choices that are available in regards to something or other. And this is quite natural. As long as we think, as long as we perceive, as long as we have our way of conditioning, we will have views and opinions. But of course, to have a view is not quite the same as to be attached to the view. The Buddha had views. Everybody has views. But to be attached to the view, my view is right, and only my view is right, that's when the problems start. With regards to having a view, that is natural. With regards to attachment to view, that is the source of conflict and suffering. So rather than just being fixed on our views, we should always try to consider, be prepared to see the same thing from a different angle, be prepared to hear someone else's view, be open, and be able to assess. Views can either be good views or bad views. Views can either be based on good reason and logic, or they can be completely foolish and illogical. Just like faith can be based on good reason, good logic, good understanding. So we call it confidence based on wisdom. Or faith may be just some foolish belief, gullible belief, unreasonable, with no wisdom as a foundation. So now with regards views and opinions, we always have to be at least prepared to consider how well-founded are our views. And when we meet people with different views, at least we must be willing to discuss, to listen to their reasons, to their logic, to their way of understanding the situation. And we of course can express our view according to our reason, our understanding. And if we are really open and sincere and seeking for better understanding, we may be able to come to a better view. Or we may just have to agree to disagree. But there's no need for conflict. So I say that as a preliminary warning with regards to these things called views, because some people have very strong feelings and very strong views about some topics, and this is one of the topics, vegetarianism. Now this evening I'm going to be talking about the topic as a contemplation, sharing my perception, my understanding. It's not meant to be a dogmatic presentation that you must accept as the ultimate word. It's not a doctrine. It is simply a suggestion. From my understanding, this is how I see it. Think about it. See how you see it. Contemplate it. It's only to stimulate some investigation, some clear thinking, hopefully, about this topic. It is not my intention to sit here and tell you what the final word on Buddhism and vegetarianism is, never to be doubted, questioned, or spoken about again. And certainly not my intention, nor the Buddhist way of presenting things. So we're just going to contemplate this topic. And I contemplate from my understanding, from my experience, from my perspective. You may agree with it or you may not, it's alright. It doesn't matter, as long as you also contemplate along and come to your own conclusions. For a start, I take a very neutral position because I don't feel there is a black and white position with regards to this particular topic. I take the Buddhist position as best as I can understand it, which I think is not black and white. Let's begin with a very fundamental question. Is it a prerequisite for Buddhists to be vegetarian according to the teachings of the Buddha, as best as we can assess? From my understanding, I would have to say that no, that is not a prerequisite. It is not a prerequisite for a person to be a vegetarian in order to be a Buddhist. In actual fact, in the Buddhist scriptures, and of course this is the authority that we normally have to rely on when people say, well, how do you know what the Buddha taught anyway? Well, it's true, I don't know, I can't remember. If I was there, I can't remember it. So what do we have to rely on? We have to rely on these scriptures that have been handed down through the centuries. As to whether we will have trust in those scriptures depends on whether we accept that these scriptures are accurate recordings, accurate representations of the Buddha's teachings. In the Theravada tradition we have these, what we call the Buddhist canon, Buddhist scriptures. There are many, many volumes divided into three groups. There is the Vinaya Pitaka, which is to do with the discipline for monks and nuns. And then there is the Sutta Pitaka, which is to do with the discourses or sermons or teachings which the Buddha gave on various aspects of Dhamma. And then there is the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is to do with the philosophy and psychology which was developed from the basic texts. it is generally accepted that this Abhidhamma Pitaka was not actually taught by the Buddha as such, although many people believe that it was taught by the Buddha to his mother, and his mother had died when the Buddha was born. So the story is that the Buddha taught this Abhidhamma, this higher Dhamma, to his mother in one of the heavenly realms. I think that it was the Kusita realm. But he went there to visit his mother, had been reborn there, and taught the Abhidhamma, the higher doctrine. And later this, Venerable Sariputta made this known. But by most scholars it's agreed that this Abhidhamma Pitaka, this higher aspect of the Dhamma, was evolved by the teachers of later periods from the basic text, from the sutras. It was developed as a system of analysis and a system of explanation to make debate very powerful, or to be able to explain things very easily. So there are these three collections of scriptures. From my own research, which is very limited, I'm not a great scholar, and my research is limited to primarily the Vinaya and the Sutta, just the discourses of the Buddha and the books of discipline. And from this, I think, I have great confidence that what is presented there in those scriptures certainly represents accurately what the Buddha taught. However, I don't certainly say that every word that's in those scriptures is exactly the word of the Buddha. There have been some changes, there have been some additions, there have been some alterations through the ages. But the essence is there, and in actual fact the texts are very, I think, very accurate and very true to what the Buddha taught. My basis for this reason is simply because, for a start, the people who passed on these teachings and kept these teachings were disciples, were monks and nuns who had tremendous respect for the Buddha, just like the monks to this day do. Tremendous respect, tremendous honor. And I don't think many monks would dare just to sort of intentionally change the teachings of the Buddha. I think very, very few monks would be prepared to do that myself. So I don't think the alterations that haven't taken place, I think they're more just a process of expedient means, and maybe for making the recitations more convenient, and maybe some things happened accidentally through the period of time, some changes, some alterations. However, I don't think that the texts were corrupted intentionally. Not in any serious, major way. And this is verified, especially with regards to books of discipline, which deal with the monastic discipline, because Buddhism spread from the Ganges Valley through the ages. It slowly spread throughout India, and moving south to, say, Sri Lanka and across to Burma and Thailand, and then north towards Tibet and eventually China. And through the centuries, it began to fragment into various schools. And some of these schools, because they flourished in different parts of India, or even different geographical settings altogether, had very little contact with each other over the centuries. However, we find that when we compare the books of discipline, in particular, between these different schools, there's quite a lot of similarity. I mean, not just similarity, very, very similar, to the extent that one would say, yes, this must have been originally the one source. So that there is a lot of good reasons to certainly have confidence in these scriptures, what we call the Pali scriptures, that they do represent the teachings of the Buddha. And anyway, this is what we've got to go on at present, because there's no one here who can say, I heard the Buddha say differently. So what we've got is these scriptures. These are the most authoritative, or the most sort of definite representation of the Buddhist teachings. Now, if we look at these scriptures very carefully, we will find that nowhere, there is nowhere where there is any injunction to either lay people or to monks with regards to diet and with regards to vegetarianism in particular. Not one place is it mentioned as a Buddhist injunction either on either the monks or the nuns or the lay people, which is quite, if the Buddha had made that a prerequisite, it would have to be someplace in there. Quite to the contrary, one does find a lot of cases when the Buddha speaks about food, especially in the rules pertaining to the monks, which indicate that the monks actually did eat meat sometimes in the time of the Buddha. Now what I'm wanting to present to you during this talk, if you bear with me for a while, is first of all just what the historical evidence that we have, and then we'll take it from there. Because in these scriptures, in particular books of discipline, there are many references to monks, what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. And a lot of them, these rules are to do with food. And you find these rules about all sorts of things pertaining to food, but some very unusual ones. If the monks were to be vegetarian, these rules seem to be completely useless or irrelevant. For instance, there is one rule which forbids monks from eating certain types of meat. The meat from certain types of animals, such as horse, elephant, dog, snake, tiger, leopard, bears. There's about a dozen types of meat specified by the Buddha that are not allowed to monks. Now this in itself would indicate something, just that he made a rule that these types of meat are not allowed by monks, are not allowed to be eaten, and the reason given for that there. Also, there's another rule where, this one is a bit gross, you must excuse me. On one occasion a monk had some sort of illness, and he was quite sick, and his lay disciple, very devout woman, said, have you ever had this illness before, and what did you take to cure it? For some sort of stomach problems. And he said, yes, I've had this before, and last time I had some meat broth, and it helped to relieve these symptoms. So she was out of faith and wanted to help the monk. She went off looking for meat to prepare meat broth for the monk. And so, being an Upasikha a moon day, none of it was the tradition in India that on that day they would not slaughter animals. So there was no meat available anywhere in the market because there was no animals slaughtered on that day. So this is the gross part, you must excuse me. So this out of great devotion decided, well, this monk can't be allowed to suffer like that. So she cut a piece of her own flesh and made a meat broth and took it to this monk and offered it to him. And apparently he drank it and recovered. But the story is that when the Buddha somehow heard about this, I can't remember the details of it, but as a result of the Buddha hearing about this, for a start he cured the lady from her ailment by restoring her to perfect health with his psychic powers, that's thank goodness. But most important and relevant to this particular topic is that he made this rule that monks are not allowed to have human flesh. Thank goodness for that one too. So now to have a strange rule which would be completely pointless having it if there was somewhere, as a prerequisite accepted, known by everybody that the monks never eat meat. So now, from these few, not few actually, there are many similar sort of things, both in the rules of discipline and in the scriptures, you see, in the discourses, there are many occasions when the Buddha is challenged. He said, Buddhist monks, they cause the killing of animals so they can eat meat. And the Buddha said, no, we don't cause the killing of animals if we eat meat. And he said that monks should not eat meat on if there's three conditions. One, if they either have seen or have heard or suspect that that animal was killed specifically to feed the monk, then the monks should refuse to accept that food. In other words, there is the occasion that if an animal is killed specifically to feed the monk, that monk is required to refuse the food. Again, obviously it indicates at other times, when the monk, food is offered, knowing that it was just food prepared for themselves, and they offer some of it to the monks, as was often the practice, because monks just went on alms round, and when they go on alms round, they're supposed to look in their bowls, they're not supposed to look at what you're going to put in it, and look in their bowl and accept whatever you're given with gratitude, without showing pleasure or displeasure. So that the idea is that on those occasions, though, one should refuse, is when one suspects that meat, or knows that meat, or has heard that meat was killed specifically to feed the monk. So now you see that throughout these scriptures that reoccur, and there are many more examples that I have given, indicate that it was not a requirement that either the monks or the lay people had to be vegetarian. It didn't seem to be a prerequisite. Furthermore, we can probably see that throughout the history of Buddhism, and we can certainly see it to this day in all the Buddhist countries, there is not one Buddhist country where vegetarian is the common practice of the Buddhist people. Not one Buddhist country. Which again would indicate that it probably hasn't been so throughout the ages, hasn't been the practice, right from the very beginning. The Mahayana monks in particular, not all Mahayana, in particular the Chinese, Vietnamese school of Buddhism, and the Japanese, some of them, are vegetarian, the monks are, but not the lay people. So that we can see historically this has been not the case, that Buddhist people in general, historically and up to the present day, haven't been strictly vegetarian, which seems to support the basic facts that are there that indicate that maybe it wasn't a prerequisite. It has never been a prerequisite for people who want to be Buddhist that they must be vegetarian. So that's the historical and the evidence as we can find. Of course, one can argue, because we can always argue, we're very good at finding different points to argue. One can argue, and it is often argued by the vegetarian monks in particular, but also lay people, that these scriptures were altered. The Buddha did teach vegetarian as a prerequisite, but those monks who wanted to eat meat, they went and changed every reference to food in all of these numerous volumes of books, and they didn't have a computer to just punch in reference to meat, page and get a whole list of words referred. These scriptures are handed down initially through word of mouth, and there are many, so it involves many monks, and not just one monk, and no one had to run a disk, and he just, when he spent half an hour, you can change it. It wasn't so easy. Very hard to change something, because there are many references to the same thing throughout the scriptures. You may change it in one place, but then it would be inconsistent with other references. And so when you look at the scriptures, it is highly unlikely that the monks could have achieved that consistency in changing all these references throughout all the scriptures. So I think that claim of the corruption of the scriptures by meat-loving monks is a bit far-fetched to me. I think it's a bit far-fetched. I think that the scriptures are accurate. I think that the Buddha did not make it a prerequisite for people. I think that it was never laid down as a rule of training for monks beyond what I have explained so far. And although now, we will want to ask, why didn't he? Because we all know that the Buddha taught not to kill any living creature. As one of the training rules for everybody who wanted to be his disciple. The very first precept for a lay Buddhist is Panatipata Vegetrianism Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami. I undertake the training of not killing any living creature. That's a training for every Buddhist. Monk, nun, novice, postulant, layman, laywoman. Fundamental. The training of harmlessness. So now, this seems to be an inconsistency there. Something wrong, it doesn't add up, we think. But I think this is maybe not thinking clearly enough about the topic. Obviously the Buddha saw a great difference in these two trainings. The training of not killing and the training regarding diet. They're very different levels. The Buddha's approach, I think, is very pragmatic. When he laid down training rules, he laid down training rules that people could keep, would keep, had a chance of keeping, had a good likelihood of keeping. For instance, he didn't lay down a training rule saying, you must not overeat. The monks, look, the monks are supposed to be alms mendicants. He laid down a lot of rules for monks. When they're allowed to eat, only in the morning, how they're allowed to eat. You're not supposed to make chomping sounds and slurping sounds. You're not supposed to drop grains of rice. You're not supposed to scrape the bowl. You're not supposed to look around. And you can make one rule about not overeating. You can really stop yourself and not break a rule. Yeah, you would think that the Buddha would have made a rule about that. Why not? He made these other rules, and then it's up to the individual to train oneself to eat in moderation. It's something you do, you take responsibility for, and you train yourself gradually towards that. But it's not a rule to start with. There is a big difference between, say, eating meat and killing animals. There is a very big difference. Although we can argue that when we kill meat, we support the killing of animals, that's true, and I'll go into that in greater detail later on, but there is a big difference. Because killing of animal means specifically intentionally depriving the animal of life, or intentionally causing, directly telling somebody else to kill an animal, right there. Your intention is to kill the animal. That is that first precept, very clear. The intention to kill the animal. What you're doing, you are doing to kill. That is your purpose behind the action. There is the intention, there is the purpose, there is the actualization of that purpose, that is killing. If you drive your car from your home to here this evening, I'm sure that you killed something. On your windscreen there would have been a few little insects. When we drive from the monastery in Perth, in Serpentine, where I live, to Perth, which is approximately 60 kilometers, especially in the morning and in the evening, that windscreen is covered with insects. Sure. And I know, when I get in the car and I ask this person to drive me, that some of these insects are going to die. I know that. But it's not, I have no intention. That's not the intention for me to get in the car and go to Perth. I don't think, I want to kill some insects today. Let's go for a spin. See how many we can squash. If that is my intention, yes, then I am killing. That is intentionally killing. But how many people do that? No one does that. You get in the car to go from A to B for some purpose. In the means of achieving, realizing that intention, maybe some things get killed. It's not your intention to kill them. That is not killing. There is death, but it's not you are not creating the karma of killing animals. So that this rule is the foundation for the Buddhist training with regards harmlessness, to refrain from intentionally killing living creatures. Now, when people eat meat, what is their intention? How many people eat meat with the intention to kill cows and pigs and the sheep? If your intention, when you get into that state, is, I'm going to eat as many steaks as I can so that I'll kill more cows, and that's your intention for eating, that would be very close to killing. But if you really consider, why do people eat meat? It's a very different reason why people eat meat. One, originally, so in the more simple societies, not simple, but very more basic societies, rural societies, such as in northern Thailand where I live, where most of the people were Buddhists, why do they eat meat? They ate frogs, they ate grasshoppers, they ate red ants, ant larvae, all sorts of things. Why? Protein. They've got to survive. They've got to have food, and it's hard to get food. It's very hard to get food. First thing, so a lot of what we eat, fundamentally, a caveman, what does he eat? Whatever he can get. Whatever he can get, he'll eat. Whatever he can get to survive, he'll eat. Basically, that's the fundamental drive to survive. He'll eat whatever he can get, whatever he can get at. That's the first thing. The survival, the first drive. Then also it becomes, what is available. But also there's the culture then begins to develop. Is what you're conditioned in. In other words, from birth, when you're brought up, what you're brought up on. That's what you're conditioned by. If you're brought up on that sort of food, you find that food agreeable. You like that food if you like. You like that food. That's why you cook that food. That's why you buy that food. And that's usually that's why you cook it, because that's what you know how to cook. But why are most Australians not vegetarian is because they're conditioned. And they eat meat because that's what they're conditioned to eat. As part of the conditioning of that culture. So when most people who are not vegetarian eat meat, it's not because they want to kill animals, it's just their conditioning, it's their culture, that's what they know how to cook, that's what they know how to eat, that's what they've been conditioned to eat since they were small, it agrees with them, that's the reason why they eat it. That's most people. You can say, but that's ignorant. Nearly everybody, even me, most people are limited in their scope of having an overall view, understanding of options and possibilities. Most people are living according to their conditioning. It doesn't have to be, but that's how it is for most people. So it is important to make this distinction. Eating meat is not the same as killing animals, because the intention is different. So the Buddha laid down this rule as a step. The first step is refrain from intentionally killing any living creature. Respect life. Human life, animal life. Respect it. So it's the start, it's not the end. It's the start. And most people can't even do that. How many people in the world can do that much? We can get really into a idealistic battle of roots of why everybody should be a vegetarian. But you must agree that the great majority of people in this planet can't even keep at that level of not intentionally killing. So that's, even at that level we can't keep it. So at least if we could keep that level, things could be a lot better. So in Buddhism, The Buddha, at a pragmatic approach, said start at this level, at least. Now, it's not the end. It's just a start. The next question that arises then, so far I've given you all these reasons why Buddhism doesn't make vegetarianism compulsory. The next point is, does Buddhism encourage the eating of meat then? No. Nowhere in the scriptures does the Buddha say, eat more meat, it's good for you. Nowhere. Nowhere does it say, give the man meat. Give the monks meat. Nowhere. Not one reference to giving the monks more meat. So the scriptures doesn't encourage the eating of meat. Certainly doesn't make no reference to it to encourage it or to suggest that it should be done. See? No reference, no encouragement for that at all. So now, what are we going to assess here then? Will this leave us all up in the air? Well, maybe it makes one very important point, is each individual must consider this carefully and come to one's own decision and take responsibility for it. And now we must consider, is vegetarianism compatible with the teachings of the Buddha? And I would say wholeheartedly yes, very compatible. Vegetarianism is a very, very compatible practice for one who is developing two things, which are what every Buddhist is trying to develop: compassion and wisdom. Compassion and wisdom is what we're cultivating through the spiritual path. Compassion means feeling real, feeling for, being sensitive to the pain of others, all life. Being sensitive to the pain of all life. And as we develop this compassion, of course, we don't want to kill. We don't want to hurt. So we don't kill, we don't hurt. Maybe then we also begin to realize out of wisdom that it is not only our direct action which has result, but also our indirect. Our actions has indirect results as well. And this is the arising of understanding. I've made quite often reference to one of the fundamental laws in nature called the dependent arising or conditioned arising. When this is, that comes to be. In other words, these conditions bring about that result. And as we develop greater clarity of mind, greater awareness, we begin to see the relationship. What we do has its consequences, it has its results. The way we live causes results. We begin to see this as a fundamental law in nature, so we become a lot more aware of how we're living and the consequences. And if we are really becoming more compassionate and more wise, we will start to choose, direct our lives, so that our lives become more harmless or contribute less to the suffering and destruction that is present in life. Now let's consider this on a broader scale than just vegetarianism, because really this topic is too small, Buddhism and vegetarianism, as if vegetarianism is an isolated thing all by itself. But there's much more to it. The whole thing, the whole aspect of life and the ecology. There's a Buddhism and the ecology, Buddhism and life. So that if we consider the way we live has its consequences, has its results. How are we living? What are we doing? Then everything we do, everything we say has its consequences. Now we happen to be part of a system. Every person sitting here is part of a system, the whole universe. One system, and you're part and parcel of it. What you do affects the universe. Amazing, isn't it? You didn't know you were so powerful. What you do affects the universe. Yes, it's true. What you do, everything you do has its effect on the universe. Now you might think, wow, me? What can I do to affect the movement of the galaxies and the planets? Well, I mean, maybe very little. But still, according to the relationship of interrelatedness, interdependence, everything you do affects everything else. Now if you can't see it as a whole, you can certainly see it even in this room. What you would do here this evening will affect everybody else. What I do is affecting you. And this is what we do affects outside. Everything we do has its long-range effect on everything else. Everything. So yes, when we eat meat, there's no doubt about it. That has its consequences. What are the consequences? Well, they are obvious. We are directly supporting an industry. That is based on rearing animals under some very terrible conditions, quite often, for the sole purpose of slaughter, so that the meat can be supplied to the butchers, so that that meat can be made available in the nicely packed the packets, so that we can buy it, cook it and eat it. Our intention when we cook and eat is not to kill animals. I don't think anyone has that intention. But the fact is, by that act of eating, the act of buying, cooking and eating, indirectly, yes, we support that killing of the animal. It's not the same as killing, but it is supporting. Now, if we understand that, yes, certain individuals may then decide, I don't want to support that, so I don't want to be part of that so much. I want to remove myself from that. And if there is one reason why a Buddhist may decide to be a vegetarian, it should be from this perspective. There is only one real valid reason: compassion. Compassion. Not wanting to contribute to the suffering any more than one has to. So then one may choose to become vegetarian from this aspect of compassion which has been arising, from the understanding of the relationship between what we do and the consequences. One may choose to do that with individual responsibility, individual choice. It's not something that one is forced into, but it's certainly compatible and praiseworthy. Compatible with the teachings of the Buddha, and I would say very praiseworthy if it's done that way. But does it stop then? Are you pure now? You've become vegetarian. Are you now blameless? Are you now blameless? Are your hands clean? Let me tell you that as long as you are alive in this system, as long as you are a member of this system, your hands will never be clean. It doesn't matter what you eat. You're always contributing to death, destruction. Always. It doesn't matter what you do. You can be a vegetarian, you can be vegan. You still contribute to destruction. Just because you are part of the system. You are part of the system, you cannot escape. You're sitting on these chairs. Plastic chairs, where do they come from? You're sitting on this carpet, and the chairs are on the carpet. Where does the carpet come from? The electricity, the air conditioning, the building, the motor cars, the trams, the buses. Where does all that come from? It's all interrelated. Everything is interrelated. We are involved. We're always involved in the whole system. So that we live in this, while we live in this system, we're always contributing. We make use of this air conditioning, we make use of electricity. It means we are in a way supporting the building of dams, the destruction of forests. There's no doubt about it. You're wearing clothes, you're wearing shoes. If you don't wear leather shoes, you wear plastic shoes. Still, who makes the plastic shoes? The chemical companies, those ones that make napalm and all the various poisons, so nice. They're supporting. For a monk, as I said, the training for a monk is to accept what one is given, not to ask, and for anything special. Most of the people we get is vegetarian. That's another one. So I'm not known. And they say, so we're not, you contribute to the other, my hands are not clean, I confess. Even if when I am vegetarian, as I can do most of the time, so my hands are still not clean. I never claim that my hands are clean, that I'm free from fault, that I'm free from contribution to death and destruction. Where do you think the fruit, the vegetables come from? How do those vegetable gardens get to be so full of trees and bushes? What happened to all the trees and the bushes? And those big fields of wheat and corn and orchards? What happened to all the forests? What happened to all the creatures that live in those forests? Gone. Time, spreading, nice vegetables, but to be nice vegetables, you've got to do something about insects. Of course, on an individual basis, one can, if you really are compassionate, if you really are wise, you can do as much as you can to minimize. But really, when you're talking about 5 billion people on this planet, that's a lot of people to feed. And there's got to be, not only to feed, to pay, all these, there's got to be a lot of destruction of many things on this planet. Directly or indirectly. Life is like that. But this is not fatalistic. What I'm saying is not fatalistic. It's making us aware of reality. Now within this reality, each individual can and should consider carefully what you are doing, how you are living, what are you consuming, how much are you contributing to that destruction. So it's not just a matter of vegetarianism, that is an important one, and it's a very, as I said, it's compatible with Buddhism, the teachings of Buddhism, it's praiseworthy, it's done properly. But, there's a lot more there, there's a lot more to do. Even if one doesn't do that one, there's a lot to do. And now we're beginning to appreciate it, aren't we? We cannot continue to just consume more and more, demand more and more, want more and more of everything. And it's spoke of this limited planet and the resources on this planet can keep it up, can supply it. You can see what the Buddha is pointing to here. One of the fundamental teachings of Buddhism is to be contented with little. Doesn't mean you have to starve yourself. It's all the idea of being contented, not being continually caught in the obsession to get more. I want more, I have to have more, I have to have something new, I have to have. Which is basically the present day consumer society syndrome, isn't it? Well, there's something from it, all of it. The whole society, Western society, American society is worse than Australian society. I've got an American friend, disciple, I'm sure I could say friend, disciple who comes and she complains because there's such a limited range of food here in Australia. You've only got 3 types of this type of chocolate. In America we've got 20 types. Big deal, something to boast about. 20 types of chocolate, 120 types of ice cream to choose from. Great, isn't it? Marvelous achievement for the human race. The apex of civilization, American consumerism. Well, it's continually more, I want more, I have to have more, I have to have greater, this one, that one, always more. with very little emphasis on is contentment. I've got enough. This is enough. This is good enough. But of course we can see where this is going to lead to, this becoming this sort of hungry ghost sentiment, the hungry ghost syndrome of ever wanting more, never satisfied, is going to destroy the ecology, destroy this planet, because the planet is limited. And the consequences are very far-reaching. When you get one hungry ghost is not so bad, but when you start getting millions of them, in America there's quite a few million hungry ghosts. And the Western world, is consumerism of wanting more. And in social appetite, which is the symbol, what is symbolized by the hungry ghost concept, it's going to consume the world. And it's consuming it at a terrible rate. So the Buddha was pointing to a very fundamental principle here. Craving. Craving is the source of problem. Craving is the source of the problem. And we can never be satisfied by just feeding it. So, contentment is very important. Being satisfied, being contented, having little needs or few needs. And of course, this is a personal judgment. No, the Buddha can't sit there and say, I am let 20 grams of cheese per person. That's ridiculous. The Buddha is an enlightened being. He wants people to become enlightened, to become responsible. The Buddha does not take no responsibility from your hands. It's up to each individual. So, with these guidelines, and then we must consider our lives, how we live and what we do, the consequences, and begin to take responsibility, each one of us. How far are we willing to give up? And each person will find their limit. Some people, maybe only one car. Some people 2 cars. Some people may only want a bicycle. This is their assessment of their need. But the more we stress compassion, the more we stress understanding, the consequences of living, the consequences of action, the more I think the human being who is becoming more enlightened, more compassionate, will make the right choice. Simplify. Simplify. Developing more contentment. Knowing enough. And this is much more important. It's the overall principle which is very important. Vegetarianism is just one factor of it, you see. It's one aspect of it. The whole is much greater, because it's just how much we consume. All Indian fruits and vegetables and clothes and shoes and electricity and power and air and fuel and everything. Because all of that is always bring about destruction. So this is the sort of the Buddhist way of approaching life. Beginning to cultivate compassion, understanding, and from that beginning to redirect our life and make the right choices. And it's up to the individual to decide how far they can go now. But the direction is to try intend to tread as lightly as possible on the planet. In other words, so that our lives won't be the cause, directly or indirectly, of so much destruction. So this is a personal thing. There's no good going around pointing fingers at people and demanding that they stop. You better stop using bleached toilet paper, otherwise we'll imprison you. Well, if the society comes to that point, that may be good too, to just ban that product. That's good. But you can't do it until sufficient people appreciate and understand the need for it. So the main thrust of Buddhism is always to try and encourage understanding, compassion and understanding. From that, everything else will come about, according to the individual's response and responsibility. So this is, you can see why I really feel quite confident that the Buddha would not have made vegetarianism a prerequisite, because that's not the way he would, pragmatically speaking, he wouldn't approach it like that. His main thrust would be to set a fundamental standard, but even that's voluntary. I mean, it's up to you to whether you do it or not. And then it's up to the individual to, through the teaching, to become more compassionate and wise, to take responsibility for one's life. See, there's whether you make the rule or not, it's whether people are going to keep it or not. It's the thing. So the best is to, the Buddha's approach was that the main thrust of his teaching was to try and encourage better understanding, encourage more compassion, so that the individual would make the appropriate choices, not only about vegetarianism, but about many, many other things. So that's my kind of reflection on it. And again, I would like to say that vegetarianism is a very noble choice. I think it's a very noble choice, but it should be made from the right volition, that is compassion and understanding. Having made it, don't abuse it by developing aversion and criticism for those who are not vegetarian. Because when, in a way, you waste it, the goodness becomes corrupted. And in actual fact, they're even worse. In some ways, even worse. So that our compassion, yes, we make our choice for ourselves. If we make a decision to explain, we explain it to others according to reason and logic. But then also the other one of really being super critical of people. And if they're not vegetarian, I think that's in some ways that's even worse. It's even worse. It's a noble thing. Like I respect people who are vegetarian myself. I think it's very noble. It's a gesture of renunciation. It's a little thing, but it's quite very good. And I would say it's very much in keeping with the thrust of the Buddhist teachings of compassion and understanding. But don't stop there, of course. Or if you're not vegetarian, don't think because you're not vegetarian you can't do anything else. There's a lot to be done in every area of life, in the way we speak, in the way we act, in everything. To be one who treads lightly, to be one who doesn't add so much to the suffering, the physical, the mental, the spiritual suffering of human beings and sentient beings on this planet. But once we have that intention, at least to try and move in that direction, I think, yes, we're good disciples of the Buddha. And each person will have to walk at their own pace. So there are my thoughts on this rather delicate topic. As I say, it's not that I want to lay down any doctrine for anyone. We're offering that for you to contemplate. You may agree, you may disagree. You're perfectly responsible and use your faculty of wisdom and reason to come to a better understanding about things like this and to make your decision. Any questions now? Yes.
Do you believe being vegetarian is healthy for the body, for the human body?
Well, that's what the medical profession is saying now, I think. That's what most people seem to say, so I guess I think it probably is, provided you read also balance. If you're going to eat vegetarian, the thing is you have to re-educate yourself. As I said, most people eat meat because that's what their diet that they've been brought up on is like that. That's the sort of food they understand, they know how to cook, and they can usually get a variety, good variety within that type of food. Now, if you're going to change from going to become vegetarian, then you better study about vegetarianism and how to cook. And it's not just, I'll just leave out all the meat. That's vegetarian. Yeah, but that diet may not be a very good one. So you've got to understand how you have to re-educate yourself about vegetarianism, how to cook, food that tastes good too, but that has the nutrients for you, to learn to develop the skill of cooking vegetarian food so you can eat it without making a big probably neither physical health or social, and that, we know how to cook is just dry vegetables, and that's all we know. It's not going to be much fun for your family or your kids. The thing is, you have to re-educate. And also the taste bud, because we have to be re-educated. But these days, with a great variety of food that is available to us, at any time of the year, you can go to these stores and buy such a great variety of things, which maybe village people could never do. They can only get certain things at certain times, but we can get. You can always get lentils, you can always do all these different things at any time, so you can make your diet, I think, sufficiently variable, sufficiently interesting, palatable, nutritious, but you have to re-educate yourself. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I know nothing about cooking. I don't cook at all. I've never cooked. I know nothing about it. I'm completely helpless in that matter. But what I said is just on the fact that I really think most people are not vegetarian because when they don't know. For start, does it taste bad? Because if it's conditioned to like certain foods, it's difficult to change. But there's also the skill of cooking that type of food. You really have to just study and go to cooking classes, study this little range of food to make a proper dietary sort of supplement food. I don't think you need vitamins if you know how to cook properly and the whole scale of the food. No, I don't think you need a vitamin supplement. It's just vegetarian food. It's just like anything else. It depends on who cooks it and how well you have it. It can be the most delicious food, or it can not worth eating. But then that's true of any food. Any food is like that. The most delicious food I've ever eaten probably is in a Vietnamese Chinese temple where it was completely vegetarian. But it certainly didn't mind. I can tell you. And they had really good cooks, and they knew how to cook vegetarian food. That was, we certainly didn't think we were renouncing anything at all. I could give out my stuffed frogs and the stuffed eggs and the grasshoppers that they served up in the northeast of Thailand any time for that sort of time. So vegetarian food, it can be both nutritious and delicious and available, a great variety, but you have to learn about it, I think. Because most of us are brought up, we're not, our culture, but most of us we've learned to cook ordinary food, which usually involves meat dishes, and that's what we know about. Yes.
It seems to me that the driving force for people to become vegetarian in this respect is the desire not to sponsor the intentional death of animals. However, I have an idea whereby people may eat meat and avoid that dilemma. And that is, why don't we raise our animals until they reach an age where they die naturally, treat them well while they're alive, and then learn to treat old animal meat with meat tenderizers or boilers and extract the food from it without sponsoring their death. I mean, all living things must die.
Well, I think things are changing very much now. I really think that the situation now is very different to what it was in the time of the Buddha. For start, I really think they did eat meat. Buddhist people, non-Buddhist people, but I don't think they were universally vegetarian in India. They even were performing animal sacrifices in the Brahmins, who are the Hindus of today. The Brahmins they performed animal sacrifices. So Brahmanism at the time, or Hinduism, it wasn't called Hinduism at that time, had nothing to do with vegetarianism. Actually, it was still in the era of animal sacrifice. It was only later on, mainly through the influence of Buddhism and Jainism, that they started to reform and eventually took on vegetarianism as an idea. But the animal killing that was really for food, for meat, was never in the same way as it is today. And for a much smaller number of people. So they used to kill an animal, and that day the animals were just roaming about, ordinarily, they didn't have battery hens, they didn't have all these industries, either by hunted wild animals or maybe like, for example, ordinary domestic animals. But it wasn't a big industry. And the amount of meat that would have been small, just like, most I grew up in Italy for 10 years. If we had meat once a week, and we had a little piece, you'd be considered yourself quite well. You don't have meat every day. And who knows what you do there, and I expect in India also, they couldn't, the amount of meat that made was very small. It was like a supplement series. But these days, because especially in the Western, our culture, the way it's evolved, is that meat almost became the dominant or the predominant part of the diet. So it's greatly exaggerated. And also the industry, it became an industry. It's a money-making industry. And when it's money-making industry, then you've got to think of efficiency, which means you can't think too much about the happiness and well-being of the animals. How can you get them fat enough, quick enough, and get as much money for them? And so you stuff them with all the sorts of things, and you keep them penned up, and whatever, like the battery chickens, or eggs, you never had battery chicken, for some reason. Now, so it becomes less and less humane and more cruel, actually. They talk about the humane way about how they kill these animals, but eventually, the number involved, the whole industry is very, very cruel, actually. So it's not something one would want to justify. With regard to your suggestion, you can see how that would be a completely inefficient way of going about. No industry could survive like that. As individually, if you're living on your own little farm, maybe you could do it. If you keep your chickens and so it only a long time. So that's but the thing is, today it's an industry. Our whole system, because the numbers of people involved, everything has become such a centralized industry which becomes less humane. So a suggestion like that is not practical in this situation.
Maybe not in our present frame of mind, but all it requires is to adjust our thoughts.
No, but also the other point of it is, if you want to do it, what happens is the amount of food that animal consumes in a lifetime. This is a real argument for vegetarianism on an ecological basis of reason for the sustaining of the planet, is that what an animal consumes and the space, just the area of land used, etc., far outweighs what you get from the animal, in other words, the meat, in terms of nutriment. Now, that's true in an industry which is efficiency geared. But if you're going to raise animals so they really die naturally and let them live in a natural way, then it becomes completely inefficient. And actually, if you want to feed people, that's a very, very inefficient way to do it. Much better not to rely on the meat industry at all to feed people. There's much more efficient ways. And this is, of course, the argument of the vegetarian point of view, is that the actual meat industry is very inefficient use of land and resources. And of course, now the public, even a better suggestion, I would say, that it is, it would be wrong about modern sciences and technology. They can make vegetarian things look and taste just like meat, so that you don't even have to change your taste buds, and all you have to make is just change your way of cooking. So you can have a vegetarian hamburger and it tastes just like a hamburger. And for many people it's very hard to give up the taste of a hamburger, so you might as well have it. But I think this will be a problem for very long, in the sense that people now one of the reasons people are reluctant to change is because they're so conditioned to their taste of that food. And this can be controlled now through these various ways of preparing bean curd and various other things to make it really look the same and taste the same as meat dishes. So that people will be centrally gratified if they're not enlightened enough to even be able to give up a taste pleasure. Theoretically, so they maybe still be able to have the sensory gratification of the taste that they like, and still be vegetarian. it becomes easier and easier to become vegetarian. It really continues to become easier. It won't be such a great act of renunciation in the future. But it really isn't today, actually. Once you know how to cook, once you know what to cook, once you know what to buy it, it's not such a renunciation, actually. It's not. But really my people again, lack of this information, and then the power of the industries. The power of the industries. Food for my meat is very strong, it's strong conditioning. You've got to get your protein, etc., etc. So be educating people so that it's not any people can do it. Once they know how to do it and once they understand why they're doing it, it's all right. Yes.
In our right frame of mind, we cannot but agree in the Buddhist teaching and always know the principles of the conductors. They like to cultivate contentment, compassion, understanding for the welfare of human beings. But in the global sense, what about completely people, less poverty, unemployment? How can we avoid that at the same time while we try to cultivate compassion?
Yes. The question is recognizing that these principles of Buddhism, such as compassion, contentment, and that I've talked about, are good. But what about the positive aspect of doing something to alleviate or reduce poverty and unemployment in the world or in the society? Life is very, very complicated. And everything is easily related to dependent. So when you make certain choices, certain results come about. Some of them you may not anticipate. It's so complicated, the whole thing is so complicated. So it needs to know the intention anyway. The intention is good when it's just how broad your vision is. But what can one do to reduce unemployment and poverty? This is a complex problem. What can we do? Well, I think if there is a better distribution of wealth and if there is more emphasis on humane living, in other words, respecting life and the selfishness, of course, you may find that a lot of the injustices will automatically begin to reduce. A lot of the poverty is there because there are so many people so wealthy. Not that all wealthy people are bad, by no means, but there seems to be this great discrepancy between the wealthy and the poor. So, what can we do? Well, I guess with regards to poverty, if we are in a position to provide assistance, not only by giving money or but to provide jobs, to provide employment, and then to pay reasonable wages, that's the sort of the emphasis. But it's the thing about jobs. How do you create jobs? What can you do to create jobs? It's very difficult, isn't it? It depends on, your contribution is probably on what sort of message, as I say, what sort of message you send to the government. But even they're limited. What can they do? You've got a bit of power to manipulate things, but there's so many factors, so many forces. So yes, I think life is very difficult. It's easy, but at least let's isolate the principles. Selfishness is the main cause of unfairness and exploitation in the world. So if we can reduce selfishness in human beings, then at least we're tackling it at the root, and maybe there'll be less unfairness, less exploitation. And if we encourage that, developing less selfishness or more contentment and more generosity, say, I think that's as a human being, that's where you can start anyway, and then depending on your position as to how much more you can do. in Buddhism actually, it is very interesting the pragmatic attitude that it takes, for instance, towards wealth. The Buddha never criticized, never put down wealthy people. Never. He didn't say, you rotten scumbags or whatever they call them. Wealthy, rich, up with the poor, down with the rich. No, nothing like that at all.
Unfortunately, human beings haven't changed since the beginning of time.
No, our instincts are much the same. Our instincts, self-gratification, self-preservation are the same. However, it is this faculty of intellect and understanding which is maturing and growing. That's why we don't just act on selfishness. And we also consider that because it's going to cannot achieve happiness at the expense of others. So we begin to see a greater picture. And also I think compassion is increasing. But what I was going to say about the Buddha, now he didn't put down rich people for being rich. Actually, being rich can be a very wonderful thing if you use it in the right way. If you acquire it by the right means and you use it in the right way, then you are in a position to do some really good things in the society. But if you get it, by being really corrupt and by exploiting and by ripping off people and cheating and lying and stealing, that's not much of an achievement. And then if you just use it to just increase your power and gratification and I'm all right, Jack, stuff you sort of attitude, of course then that is blameworthy. That's misuse of a power. But if the person is rich and has acquired his wealth in a good way and then uses it for the welfare of the society by various means, which was the case in the time of the Buddha, the wealthy ones were the ones who did a lot of the wonderful things in this. They established hospitals, they established alms distributing centres, they established rest houses for travellers, they fed the poor, like Anathapindika, who was one of the famous disciples, no disciples of the Buddha, that means the feeder of the poor. He was very wealthy, but he used his wealth to feed the poor. So this is very wonderful. Rich people have the ability to help if they are good people, if they have good principles. So being rich is not a fault, it's an opportunity to do good things.
This is the exception to the rule, unfortunately.
Well, yes. I don't know if it's the exception, but it's certainly a lot of rich people can also be not so good. Not so good. But then they may become more and more aware that they cannot achieve their happiness at the expense of others' happiness. And although we can be very short-sighted, but I don't, in the long run, we must see it. Yes. Really, our instinct, it's not basic in the sense of original fundamental. It's just that the conditioning, the basic conditioning is the tendency to self-gratification, craving. But in actual fact, that's not the most basic nature. In its original state, the mind is pure, radiant. It becomes corrupted, or it becomes tarnished, blemished. Now the defilements that arise out of conditioning, out of ignorance, if you wish. So how to change this? You have to develop the mind. You have to develop it so as to dispel that ignorance that causes these defilements. And that is possible. And the development of the mind is following the path. Yes. No, fish is just included as meat, and not much distinction is made. And there's also it's nothing like that about God being pure or impure. There's no reference to that any particular type of meat is impure, not allowed because it's impure, all that. No, there's no mention to that. And there's no mention that these animals are put on here for us to eat either. The Buddha just took this thing that I may just try to explain. Certainly the fundamental theme throughout Buddhism is compassion for and respect for life and compassion for all living creatures. And that all living creatures are fundamentally the same. So that whereas fish or animals are much the same, and human beings are much the same as well. It's not that empty idea of diet being a way of purification or diet being a way of corruption, defilement. Diet is not mentioned very much in Buddhism. Those animals that were forbidden by the Buddha to eat, it's not because they were impure or anything like that, there were other reasons. I'm not really sure about it myself actually. The reasons given are two main types of reasons. One is that some of those animals were very of great service to humanity, like elephants and horses, obviously very valuable to human beings. And some of them were considered dangerous. And so, very dangerous to go hunting for tigers and bears. And another reason that is different, I really found this one difficult to believe, but I'll tell it to you, is like the idea that if you eat a snake, then you will get bitten by a snake because the snakes can tell if you've eaten. I'm not sure about that one, I found that a bit far-fetched, but there are these sort of reasons that the Buddha forbade man from eating those sort of animals. But there isn't that, it's kind of like the idea that on certain days it's forbidden to eat meat, on other days it's all right. That is not, it's not found in Buddhism. But it may be a good practice, if somebody can't eat vegetarian or doesn't want to eat, they want to be vegetarian, but they can't eat all the time, then maybe they can be some days. It's an act of renunciation, basically. It's not a sin if you don't. It's an act of renunciation. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Vegetables not really food?
Everything is living in a way. So vegetables are living organic things, but they're not conscious things. They don't have a mind. They don't have consciousness. They don't have a mind. So we make a distinction between vegetable matter and animal. Living creatures meaning animals, and that with breath, actually treated like insects, fish. I say that not unless it is told by science. We can't see them breathing. And it's more complicated than that, because if you really go down to very small, there are some forms of life which you cannot decide whether it's vegetable or animal. But of course, that's the problem. When does it become animal? But in our ordinary living, that's not the way we experience life. We can tell what is a living creature and what is vegetation and matter. So Buddhism makes that distinction. To murder a pumpkin or a salad is not the same as killing an animal or an insect or fish or bird. It's not the same. It's never been considered the same karma. And being a farmer, say, a vegetable farmer, growing vegetables, is considered right livelihood. It's not wrong livelihood. It's not considered as doing something bad or killing potatoes. So it makes a clear distinction there between vegetable and living creatures. Maybe it's about. Yes, that is considered wrong livelihood. Making a living through hunting, killing, slaughtering, or even just being a butcher. Dealing in meat, flesh, is usually considered wrong livelihood. Certainly killing, dealing in poisons, dealing in arms and traps. In other words, we're so closely related to the actual killing by making these things available that is all wrong livelihood. Being a soldier is also considered wrong livelihood because we're learning the art of killing. So it's wrong livelihood. But it doesn't mean, the Buddha then ostracized all soldiers because he would have kings for his disciples and soldiers for his disciples. It's just saying, if you can earn your livelihood in a better way than that, it's good. But in Buddhism, it's not like ostracizing people or excommunicating. I've threatened to excommunicate people if they don't attend meetings. I'm joking though. There's no excommunication. One may be a very good disciple or not such a good disciple. One may be greatly developed in the past and not so far developed in the past, but it's up to the individual to take responsibility. The Buddhist teachings simply makes it's guidelines and says, well, that's not a very good way to earn a living. It's wrong livelihood. And it might be good if you could change it. And if you have a decision to change it or avoid that, it's good. That's just killing. Yes, if you have to live, I wouldn't do it. But then I can really, sometimes it's very difficult for people who are trapped in a situation where they can't. That's the only job they can get. It may be very difficult for them. So dealing in alcohol is also wrong livelihood. I had one disciple, I don't remember what he used to do, and then he got this job as selling wine. He was a representative for this wine company. And he had to go around selling wine to all these places. He used to carry all these samples of wine in the back of his car. Very embarrassing. Have a disciple like that. And I had another man who used to live in North Perth in this small house, much the same as the house in Richmond. And one day this man came knocking on the door, pounding on the door, and I go out. The door was open, but it was just knocking to see if anyone was in there, and he go out and he starts, he says, hello, I'm from so-and-so company, and he pulls out his card and he says, I stay under the house and around the fences and I get rid of all your insects and all these different all the insects that they got rid of and he kept on going and gave me this whole spiel and I just sit there. And then he said, I said, no, I don't think there's anything strange out here. And he said, yeah, Buddhist, thank you. And he said, it's not, this is the Buddhist part. He says, you don't believe in prayer. I said, we try to.